Okay. So thanks so much to all of you for coming to this meeting, even though it's such a beautiful day out. And just going to say a couple things. One is there's a lot of people here. We're not going to go around with introductions, so please introduce yourself in the chat. At Sunflower Alliance, we usually focus on stopping fossil fuel extraction and refining as the key to making the climate crisis less horrible than it's going to be otherwise. But at the same time, public transportation is an essential other part of that equation, both from a social justice and from a climate and environmental justice point of view. We were at a meeting in Contra Costa County a while ago in East Contra Costa County, talking about one of our goals, which is to make a ban on fossil fuel drilling in Contra Costa County. And one of the residents stepped up and said, "But how will I get to work?" So that's an important question. And that answer is got to be about expanding public transportation. But meanwhile, in the short run, you may have heard that public transportation agencies are now in an absolute financial crisis because as a result of COVID, their ridership dropped off a lot. It's coming back up some, but not nearly fast enough to prevent them from financial disaster. The federal government has been sending emergency assistance, but that's going to end soon. And so what we say is the public transportation agencies are facing what they're calling a fiscal cliff. Like, they're not going to have enough money to keep operating even the inadequate service they already do if state funds aren't really available at an emergency basis to keep the public transportation system going. Then in the long run, so this is a crisis not only for people who now depend on public transportation and for public transportation workers, it's also a crisis for the climate and the environment, because like that Contra Costa resident said, people need a way to get around. And just taking our current dysfunctional system of everybody driving their own car and making all the vehicles electric is not going to work for a very large number of climate, environmental, and social justice reasons. We have to build the kind of public transportation system that most people can't envision. But it's hard to build a constituency for that because people look at the public transportation system now and said, why should I advocate for that? Doesn't meet my needs. And as somebody for whom walking a quarter of a mile is a challenge, I can understand that issue. So what we need to do is two things at the same time, which is fight for immediate funds to prevent public transportation from going under financially, and fight for a long run system of public transportation that really meets our needs. So we are extremely lucky to have with us today three people who are leaders in that fight. We have Amy Thompson from an organization called Transform, which advocates for public transportation that works for everybody. We have Mary Lim Lampe, who works for Genesis, which is an organization that advocates for and organizes low income and vulnerable people for public transportation as part of their mission, their justice mission. And we have Adina Levin, who works for Seamless Bay Area, whose goal is to transform Bay Area's fragmented public transportation into a unified, equitable, and widely used system. And these are like, let me tell you, these people are the experts on this, and we are so lucky to have them. So I think I'm just going to turn it over to them to run the show. I think Amy's going to begin. Is that right?
That's right. So I'm going to share my screen. Pull up some slides. Thanks, Jean, for the excellent introduction. I'm just going to expand on some of what you started. The story you started to tell, which is the Survive and Thrive Transit campaign. The three of us on the call, Adina and Mary and I, are all part of Voices for Public Transportation. And that is a kind of like a coalition of nonprofits that are working to save transit and reimagine a transit future here and throughout the state. And as Jean started to mention, transit ridership was really decimated in the pandemic, and that recovery has been slow and uneven. So in addition to lost fares, there's also lost sales tax and property tax revenue that has resulted in transit's existing fiscal crisis. And there was some federal relief money that was distributed on a one-time basis that was keeping transit service running. It was keeping our transit operators, who are real community members and government representatives, union jobs, like really stand-up folks. It was keeping them paid. It was keeping critical service on the streets. And that money is running out. And now we have 72% of transit agencies across the state facing these transit operations shortfalls. And transit operations shortfalls are the exact dollars we need to maintain critical transit service, pay our union represented operators. And here in the Bay Area, we're seeing a shortfall of $3 billion in the next 5 years. So what would that actually look like if we didn't identify that money? You might have seen in the headlines talk of these kind of doomsday scenarios. For BART, for example, they were asked to talk through what would happen if they didn't identify some new funding, and they would need to reduce service to something like 3 lines with 60-minute headways running only during the week. SFMTA would, in the best case scenario, put together, they would run about 80% of existing transit service, so a service cut of about 20%. For myself, as a California native, I grew up in Los Angeles with a car, and I chose to move to the Bay Area to live in a place where I could live without a car, to reduce my carbon footprint and to be more connected to my community, kind of on the ground and taking the bus. And if BART were running every hour, I would need an alternative to get to work, an alternative to see my family in San Francisco and in Oakland. And BART also found that service level of a 60-minute frequency would result in at least 100 million unmet demand rides, which means that folks would no longer be able to rely on transit service, and they would have to take some other form of transportation. Excuse me. And we also know, and I'm sure many of you guys have seen, that traffic is back, car traffic and congestion is back on the streets. And as Jean started to mention, electric vehicles are really not the answer here. And we're not the only 2 people saying that. The California Air Resources Board, which is the state agency that makes the plan to combat climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it has also found that electric vehicles are not the answer. And some of that reasoning is that cars are the most expensive way to travel. So this is really continuing to prioritize our whiter and wealthier residents, which is a status quo we cannot afford to maintain. And also that they are going to continue the congestion problem, and to really address climate change, we need to think about public transit. Public transit is really one of our strongest strategies to think through social equity, racial equity, and combating the climate crisis. And that's because the California Air Resources Board has found that by 2030, we need to double transit service across the state, and we need to reduce the amount of miles that cars are driving on our streets by 25%. And that is a necessary part of our chances at combating climate change together. We also know that existing transit service is really serving our most marginalized residents. Low income, Black, and people of color are more likely to be transit riders. And we need to invest in this service that is both essential, and we also need to make it comfortable and affordable. I don't want people to be taking transit because they have to. We want people to be taking transit because it's the easiest way to get there. It's a way to see your community. It's a way to serve the climate, but it's also an easy and comfortable way to get to work. And we know that that's possible. So the last thing I kind of want to talk through is we can see that transit ridership is really both dependent on access and income. So this graph that you're looking at is state level data. And essentially what it says is that transit ridership is directly tied to income. Right now, our low income folks are more likely to ride than high income folks. And it's also directly tied to access. It's directly tied to having transit near your house that runs 15 minutes. It runs at a frequency of 15 minutes or less. So we can see that if folks have access to frequent and reliable transit, they take it more, and we can invest in it. And we can make it the option that folks take because it's how they see their neighbors, it's comfortable, and you have a seat. So to talk a little bit more about that investment, I'm going to pass to Avina.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. And if you want to forward the slide. The name for this campaign is Survive and Thrive, because we know that the public transportation system that we have had, even before the impacts of the pandemic, was not up to what we needed to be for the equity and justice reasons and for the climate reasons that we needed. And there is all the more reason to, go in the direction to make the service better now in order to regrow ridership and reach those goals. So the Survive and Thrive campaign is seeking a multi-year commitment from the state budget sources to prevent service and job cuts in order to be able to take steps to make the system more convenient and more equitable. And I'll going to talk a little bit more about both the immediate opportunities and the medium and longer term opportunities to have a future of convenient and abundant and affordable public transportation. Next slide. And as anyone who has really experienced using public transportation system in the Bay Area knows our system was not fully serving those goals before the pandemic. Part of our challenge in the Bay Area is fragmentation. We have 27 different transit agencies that before the pandemic had very little coordination with different planning, different fares. If someone took a trip and they had to use two different colors of buses or a bus and a train, they had to pay twice most of the time. The bus will get stuck in traffic and go more slowly. There are a lot of just a lot of barriers that make trips to be uncompetitive and unaffordable, such that even before COVID, only 5% of overall trips in the Bay Area, or 10 to 12% of commute trips, were on transit. And it is possible to do better than the way that we have in the Bay Area. As the Voices for Public Transportation, we did some research a couple of years ago and comparing the Bay Area to other regions around the US and around North America. And we found that, for example, the region of Toronto, which is pretty similar geographically to the Bay Area, with some dense, with dense urban areas and also, less dense areas as well, had significantly higher ridership per person, and they had about twice as much service than we had. So if you shift to the next slide. So it's possible to do better. And in order to be able to achieve those goals, we need, and we can achieve, it is possible to achieve a system that works for people who are using it, and is well connected at a regional level, designed to work as a system with different agencies that continue to work together under the hood to operate different parts of an integrated system, where the fares, the schedules, the signs are reliable and simple, affordable and accessible. And we also have transit that does not get stuck in traffic and is frequent and rapid in order to help people get to where they need to go. And it is that kind of a system that gets the diverse and large ridership that achieves the goals that we are seeking. So next slide. Fortunately, in the Bay Area, we have started to use the crisis of the pandemic as an opportunity to be able to head off in this direction. And with some advocacy over time, the Bay Area was working during the pandemic to create plans and programs in order to be able to have a more coordinated, more affordable, more easy to use and faster and more accessible system. And these plans are now moving forward in a exciting way that I'll give some examples of momentarily. Next slide. So one really exciting program that is in progress now is a pilot all agency transit pass. This is something that started last summer, providing service to people in public colleges and universities, including UC Berkeley, San Francisco State, San Jose State, as well as people living in a dozen affordable housing communities around the region. And what this program does is it gave to a random sample of people who had a single agency transit pass. So someone who had a pass for AC Transit, or someone who had a pass for VTA, and said, now you can use the wealth of public transportation that is available in the Bay Area. And the early data is showing that people with a Bay Pass are taking about 40% more trips than the people who had a one agency pass. And not only are they taking 40% more transit trips than before, but they're taking more transit trips on the original agency for which they had that pass. So someone who had AC Transit only now is using more AC Transit than before, in addition to being able to use BART and being able to use SFMTA and take a ferry if they need to, and so on. Next slide. Another thing that's really changing is changing how we plan, because one of the reasons why it is difficult to get around in transit is that our planning has been done in a very fragmented fashion, and each county and each transit agency has historically put together a list of capital projects and sent them off to MTC, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is a regional agency that stapled all of these projects together and said, here, this big binder that is full of all these separate projects is our transit network. And that is not how it is done in places. These slides are from Switzerland. This is not how it is done in places around the world that do have that convenient and well-connected network. Instead, the way that they plan is to start with the service. So the idea, if I want to get from point A to point B, how fast do I want to be, how fast to make that trip? How frequent should the service be to make that trip? What connections might need to be made? How can those connections be improved? And then what capital investments might be needed to make those journeys be better connected. And the Bay Area this year, for the first time in history, is starting to do our planning in this manner, starting from that COVID era, figuring out how do we improve the system. Next slide. Can you get to the bus slide? I think that you had put that in the deck. I'll talk a little bit while Amy finds the slide that she had added. One of the things that's really important and is part of what we're doing at a regional level is to make investments so that our buses and trains don't get stuck in traffic and are easy to use, and so that is a part of the picture. So if you go back to where we were before in the deck, so part of the Survive and Thrive is to have funding to maintain the service and to be able to improve it, to continue to invest in these improvements to make this to make the service better. If you go back into the deck to do you want me to pick this up, or
Either way, or just let me know.
okay,
I'm just
all right, just go back to it's 26. All right, so I'm gonna say one more thing on the doom and gloom and risk side, and then even more things on the opportunity side. So on the doom and gloom side, we've been here before, and we can't afford to repeat the mistakes that we had before. So the map at the bottom right is of the key system. The East Bay had a wide-ranging and frequent streetcar network, and in the start of the car era, that was ripped up, and we have never yet come back to the system that we had then. Similarly, in Los Angeles, they also had a pre-car era major public transportation system that declined in the car era, and we are not yet back to where we were before then. So at a point, the lesson here is that it is true that the key system morphed into AC transit, but we are still there's levels of service that we are not back to. And so the point is that when we're in a point of crisis, that's the time that we need to take and preserve and improve, rather than losing what we have at that point of crisis. Next slide. So what we're looking for is a three-pronged approach in the short term and in the long term. So in the immediate term, we are looking for the state multi-year budget ask. In the medium term, we're looking for regional funding to help fund those improvements that the transit system is working on now. And then also at the state level, there are some medium to longer term ways that we can systematically change what we're doing in order to be able to achieve this vision that we are talking about. Next slide. So speaking at the state level, this is some analysis that Spur did, showing that California in 2020 spent $1.6 billion on transit operations. That's the service, that's running the buses and the trains and the ferries. But that is the smallest bucket of all of the different transportation investments in roads, bridges, electric vehicles, and capital programs. Next slide. And California has underfunds transit service compared to other compared to other states that have robust transit systems around the nation. So we underfund transit service. And so when we talk about the actions, we'll talk about some of the advocacy and work that's being done to fix this system problem in the medium term. Next slide. The other thing that we are working on with Voices for Transportation is at a regional level, really providing regional support for abundant and affordable public transportation. Next slide. So this is where we get to, I'll outline the actions, and then Mary will walk us, we'll take questions, and then Mary will walk us through specific actions that we can take starting today. So for this budget campaign, there are key deadlines that are coming up. The governor is going to issue his revision of his budget proposal on May 10th. That is coming up soon. And the deadline to pass the budget is June 15th. So the actions, one thing for everyone to take action is to, there is a petition to sign. And this petition is extremely important because people who sign the petition will also hear about things like the budget hearings that are going to be coming up and opportunities for legislative visits. We'll talk some more about calling your legislator today. And then I'll zoom out and talk about a couple of more big picture things before we dive in and do Q&A and take action. There's actually a bill in the legislature that is for the state of California to explore our underfunding of transit operations and look to longer term solutions to that. And there are also going to be opportunities coming up over later in the spring and definitely in the summer to support a regional public transportation funding measure with Voices for Public Transportation. So I didn't mention federal. If anybody asks about federal, I'll mention that too, but this is a good time to stop and take questions.
So one of the questions that someone put in the chat, this has to do with our slides. And maybe Amy, you could just answer this. There's an acronym, there's a few acronyms in slide number 15 that talked about household trips, transit trips per day, HGD, TOD, HQ, TA, and non. I think it's transit, or I don't know what that means actually.
Yeah, you do. So yeah, this is some state level data that Transform analyzed and published in a larger report that was talking about the fact that transit oriented development works, and transit oriented development is essentially building by our transit stations. So if you guys have been to Fruitvale, that's a transit oriented development with a lot of housing like right there at the BART station, and any sort of development by a BART station or high frequency transit. And high frequency transit is defined by transit that runs 15 minutes or less, every 15 minutes or less. So you kind of know that when you walk up to that transit stop, you're not going to be waiting for more than 15 minutes. And that's really helpful as a transit rider to know that there's going to be a bus or a train coming to pick you up. So HCD TOD is essentially it's like the transit oriented development definition at the state level, which includes transit that runs at 15 minutes or less, and I think like a certain level of density of housing. And then the high quality transit area encompasses like a bus at a 15-minute or less frequency. And then non-transit oriented development would mean that they don't have access to that high frequent transit. And so it would be more akin to like a suburb or someone that is far away. Oh, and I'm sorry, one other thing. The HCD TOD is a 4th mile radius, and the high quality transit area is a half mile radius. So you can see that those folks who are taking transit more frequently are closer. There's something like 5 to 7 minute walk.
I just want to point out that on your chart, you've got it also by income level. And the people with extremely low income who live in places that are not transit-oriented development, where it's really hard to take transit, still take transit a lot more than people who have higher incomes. So what you're talking about there is people who are served by a system that is completely inadequate and have to use it anyway.
That's the point, Jean. That's the most important thing of this chart, is to show when we invest in transit, we're doing what we can to support people who are the most vulnerable, people who are living in poverty. So another question came from Dean. Just a question, is the all transit pass different from the Clipper card?
Right.
Carol just gave the answer in the chat that Clipper is used and set up to pay fares. Bay Area transit system, including the Smart Train and Golden Gate Ferry.
Yes, that is true. But there's also a difference between the fare payment. So a Clipper card is the payment technology, it's the payment method, but that's different from the fares themselves. So today, if I take Samtrans to Caltrain to BART to go to San Francisco, I pay 3 times. So even though I'm using the Clipper card, I'm paying 3 different times for that trip. And what the Bay Pass does, using the Clipper as how you pay, but it is giving people access to all the agencies rather than just one. So
we have another question from Alejandra about biking being included in the broader scope of transit infrastructure. You know, how can, you know, biking access and safety be part of alternatives of buses and passenger trains? I'm going to just say that Genesis was involved in a campaign for a measure about 5 years ago now, maybe 6 years ago, called Measure BB, where, you know, for sure, I really like the instinct that we need to make sure that we're including biking and just creating infrastructure around biking to be included for public transportation, because it is, you know, for every bike on the road that takes a car off the road, and that they should be respected. I will say that just joining, you know, both transportation, public transit, and biking, it's been very, very challenging for those of us who focus on public transportation as an equity issue, because we're often really trying to focus on making sure that transit is accessible to people who will never ever be able to drive, and sometimes there's just like a different language than bicycle infrastructure. I just want to see if Amy or Dina have anything to add.
I can quickly just add that our the Bay Area region's transit-oriented development policy, which passed in September, which essentially makes the rules around like what the area and land feels like around our BART stations and around our frequent transit hubs, required for the first time a transit access study, and that looked at biking and walking and bus access to some of our frequent transit hubs and identifying those gaps and then putting those gaps into the capital infrastructure plan. So kind of identifying the places where there are bike lanes here, but not here, and how can people bike seamlessly and walk comfortably to transit in the area.
Alejandra, though, it's a really good question. One of the Genesis congregations, St. Augustine Episcopal, which is on Telegraph and 34th, I believe, something like that, in Oakland, you know, where there was a construction that happened that essentially moved their parking spots away from the curb to make room for a protected bike lane. The church never was consulted, the residents were never talked to, and that made it so the elders that parked around the church had to go like further and sort of hop through the bike lane to get up on the curb to get to the church, which provided a lot more steps for people who have mobility issues. So there's just a little bit of, I think that there just needs to be a lot more conversation when infrastructure issues like that happen, because a lot of the elders and their caregivers were really bent out of shape that they had to negotiate through a bike lane and get on the curb and make it, make their way up the steps. And so I saw Eugene, but I just wanted to see if there was any other questions. We just wanted to leave some space for clarifying questions around the state of where we're at. Oh, no, I'm sorry. If you do have a question, you can just use your reaction button and raise your hand. And if you don't have access to that, you can just unmute yourself. There's Steve. Steve, what's your question?
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for doing this as usual. And as you know, I've come to several of meetings that have involved all of you all, including Voices for Public Transportation. I just want to more of a comment, and this is directed at everybody. I think it's important in this fight we involve transit worker unions because they can be powerful allies in raising the awareness about this issue and the importance of it. There are some groups, there's People's Transit Alliance that includes some transit workers that are involved in it, and others which I will continue to try and continue to form the connective tissue between. And there are other groups that I'm involved in that can do this work, but I think it's important that this be seen as both a labor and a climate issue, because without it, obviously we're not going to win without both groups being involved. So it's more of me soapboxing than asking a question, but I just wanted to put that out there again, as if the obvious didn't need to be restated.
Thanks for bringing that up. It's really important. They're definitely, workers are definitely facing a lot of crisis. Transit workers are definitely facing a lot of crisis. Eugene, did you have something?
Oh, yes. I don't know if everybody can hear me. I'm coming into my hotel from my vacation down south. Anyway, my name is Eugene. For those who don't know me, my name is Eugene Bradley. I am founder and CEO of the Silicon Valley Transit Users. Just to address Steve's concern, I've already been in contact with John Courtney. He is the president and business agent of ATU Local 265. He's also been monitoring this issue. When I get home, I'm already ahead of you on that one, Steve. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Eugene. So my
You're
name
welcome.
is Mary. Eugene, you're freezing. I don't know if that's just for me though.
No,
No, like I said, I'm on vacation. Coming in from a
Okay.
hotel.
Sure.
Chug slow connection and all happens.
It's pretty glitchy, but I think we got the gist of it. I think Janet has a question too.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this. I have a question about housing developments around BART stations and how that is affecting access to BART. El Cerrito, which is one of the stations near my home, is planning to basically get rid of their parking lots and not provide any parking for people coming to the BART station from the hills. And there doesn't seem, not only did they didn't do a whole lot of local outreach about this. People were kind of taken by surprise. But then what are folks who live in the hills going to do, especially people with mobility issues, even local people with mobility issues who it just seems to be like a big problem that BART just kind of is just sort of shining on.
Okay. Amy, since you had shared the TOD slide, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to provide. I haven't worked directly on the El Cerrito instance, but BART is repurposing a lot of their parking lots right now. And I think the zoomed out view there is that we do need to repurpose our parking for things like housing and bike lanes, and we need to invest in transit. We need to invest in alternative modes so that folks from the hills can get down to the BART station on a bus that runs every 5 to 10 minutes. That's, like 5-minute walk from their house. But I think it's absolutely, it's disconcerting, like to see the parking lot go away and to live in the hills and feel like that access is going away. So I think that's actually one of the reasons that we're here, is to think big about other ways we can get to the BART station, and to really push local council members, and to tell those individual stories of the importance of providing an accessible alternative. I think, I think the disability movement is something that's really important to Voices for Public Transit and hasn't been touched on too much today, but it's something that we are deeply connected to, and both Adina and Mary are such leaders in and just the amount of mobility that public transit provides for folks with disability who can't drive at all. So we need to create those frequent and reliable bus and transit options for everyone in all areas, from the hills to how far from that BART station.
So if it's okay, Jean and Janet, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Jean. I was gonna go to my piece and see if we had any questions. I just don't want us to lose time. Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
just want to mention my fantasy that I've had for a long time, which, because in some other countries where there's more public transportation, it's not, you don't have just either full-size buses or trains. There are like shuttle buses, mini buses. And because I just, a shout out to my hero, my city council member in Berkeley is my hero, Kate Harrison. And when this was being discussed in Berkeley, she said, the answer is having electric shuttle buses combing through the hills. Maybe you could have them on demand, like there's an airport shuttle or something. The airport shuttles are on demand. People can call them and they come around and they get you. Or we could have some other system. I don't know. I mean, I'm not designing a system here. I'm just saying that electric mini buses and vans and shuttles, I think, need to be part of the equation.
Thanks. You got some good reaction. So Steve, I'm just gonna go ahead and go to my piece, and we'll come back to you. We have just a few things that we wanted to just offer. My name is Mary Lim again. I am Executive Director of Genesis. We use community organizing to engage our base, which is mostly faith and community organizations. We work really hard to engage and just get people to do something about policies that really violate their values every day. And public transit is, the more that we've done work and organizing around public transit, the more we see that a lot of the policies that favor cars and car culture are really steeped in capitalism, but also racism and ableism. So we've been really fortunate, and there's a few of Genesis board members, and our task force leader, Carol Taylor, is here with us today. We've been really fortunate to build relationship with people who live with disabilities, who will never drive. They will never drive. And also just really lucky to be an organizer that does a lot of listening of a broad base of people. Whenever I start talking about public transit with a person who never takes public transit, they're absolutely a car driver. They often are like, I've had people say to me, I worked really hard for this car. And there's sort of this narrative that if you work really hard, you'll get a car, and it ends up being like this, like, marker of success. I mean, for sure, that's the way that I was brought up. And as a daughter of an immigrant, and the more that I like have listened to people, the more we've really had to change the narrative. Think about we're all aging. I have a mother, an elderly mother, who cannot drive anymore, and I love that she has a shuttle with her senior, and she's got like all these resources to get her places, but it's not enough. She often has to rely on the schedule of a shuttle because she doesn't have public transit near her. We have a leader who lives in Livermore, and he works in Pleasanton, and he is someone who will never drive. He has autism. We should not make it. He relies on a bus that arrives once an hour, and if he misses it, that's it for the day. So we need to do better for people who live with disabilities and low income people of color. We just need to do better. And when we have a thriving public transit system, we all do better. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just give some opportunities. This feels like doom and gloom, but the one thing we know is that we really feel like our elected officials need to hear more about our views on public transit. So one thing that we have suggested is that we want our elected officials to hear from us. So we have an invitation to all of you to join our Hour of Power. And Amy, I'm going to go ahead and let you share because this is, I don't know what's going on, but it's just like not letting me advance. So I'm going to stop. Can you start with that one? Thanks. We have 3 ways that you can act. One is, and someone can put it in the chat, one is the petition that Adina mentioned. We could all literally click on it right now. There's 26 of us on here. And a petition, as you know, is like a really simple way of like just adding your name and your email and click, you've done it. You'll, like Adina said, you'll end up being on a list from our action network where we will let you know when the key times to make calls and show up will be. So the first thing is that petition. Adina just put it in the chat. Thank you. The second is our Hour of Power. So tomorrow, because today none of the electeds are in their office, nor are their staff. But tomorrow between 11 and noon, we wanted to invite Sunflower Alliance to make calls, like concerted calls to their state senator and their assembly member. We have an assumption, and this may be wrong, but for many of us, it will be the East Bay representatives. So could you just forward one slide? I think that this is the list of electeds. We have for you, if you want to take a picture, of phone numbers for Senator Nancy Skinner. She represents Senate District number 9, which is mostly Alameda, Contra Costa County. And we also have Assembly Member Buffy Wicks, Assembly District 14. She is also on the Transportation Committee. We're inviting you between 11 and noon tomorrow to make calls to them. If you want to forward it, Amy. We'll send out phone numbers later. If you don't know who your representative is, no problem. You can use this QR code to find it. If you want to use your phone and figure that out, who your assembly member and your state senator is, and then forward it, Amy. And then we have a little bit of a script for you. I'm just going to go over it really quick, that you could just say who you are, that you're a constituent, that you learned from a Sunflower Alliance webinar yesterday that public transit will soon fall off a fiscal cliff, and you could ask them to support transit operations funding in the state budget to save public transit. Really, really simple. Use your own words. Many of you have done this before. We're asking people to make calls between 11 and noon tomorrow. We will send out all of this info, including the talking points, in a follow-up email to everyone on this call right after this call. Gina's cooked that up. I like to say, just so you know, I like to say why it matters to me. You know, it matters to me because I believe that people who live with disabilities deserve transit that is reliable and that won't leave them stranded. So the last thing is a letter writing. And I just want to see if, you know, can you drop in that link? the letter writing is the letter, and you can take down the slide, Amy, thank you. We have a customizable letter through Action Network to send your state legislator. This is sort of like, if you do the petition and you want extra credit, go ahead and do the letter. It's been dropped in the chat as well. All these links will be sent to you, so don't worry about if you can't access the chat, don't worry, it's going to get emailed to you. So anyway, thank you for the invitation, Jean and Janet. Just thank you so much for Sunflower Alliance for putting this together. And I'm just going to hand it over to you, Jean.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. This is so important, and it's on one level it's complicated, and on another level it's really not complicated. It's like this is a no-brainer, but it just is going to require huge amounts of political push to get the money to do it, to redirect our resources. I just want to add one other little thing about what's wrong with the system of cars. It's not just it's not just that cars are expensive and cars pollute. It's also that even if they were all electric, just manufacturing and maintaining all those cars takes insane amounts of resources, both material resources and also financial resources. Also, the car infrastructure, maintaining all the highways and parking lots and all that other stuff and building more of them is an incredible waste of resources. And if you could imagine some of the land that is now devoted to highways and parking lots having plants on it, that would be good from the point of view of climate. Okay, so I got Amy, Steve, and then Margaret.
I just want to add one thing that I realized we didn't touch on in the presentation, which is kind of the impact that you calling or writing a letter to your legislator has. So Adina and Mary and I have been at this for years now. We were meeting with legislators during last year's budget cycle, and we are back in Zoom rooms, bringing not just ourselves, but also late union representation and voices of disabled folks, voices of transit riders, to tell legislators where they need to spend money and why we need to invest in transit. And that is truly how decisions get made. Like the squeaky wheel gets what's the saying? Like that's how decisions get made in our current kind of state of policy. And so if it feels just like one call or you're busy tomorrow at 11 a.m., like please understand it's a huge impact in years of work that we've been a part of, and it's really a really big movement that you're helping to advance. So I appreciate you guys showing up and taking the time.
Thank you. Steve, do you still want to talk?
Yes, I do. Thanks. Something you brought up, Jean, reminded me, one thing we also have to be mindful of, although I do support the idea of the on-demand shuttle buses, we have to make sure they're not owned and operated by companies like Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft are not only destroying our public transportation system, they're one of the many factors. They're out to destroy our public transit system because Uber and Lyft were started by far-right so-called libertarians who consider public transit an anathema to their utopian vision of unfettered capitalism. And so we have to make sure that not only does anything we set up have public oversight, and for that matter is unionized or at least has good working conditions, we got to tackle the Uber and Lyft problem. And this is not unrelated, but I'm going to make a plug as a member of Railroad Workers United to support their campaign to bring the nation's railroads under public ownership, because that will be another way we can promote public transit. Because one of the things that currently hampers Amtrak and other commuter rail is they have to pull into a siding every time a freight train comes by because the freight trains have priority. Now, this is more of a national thing, not directly related to California or local, but it is still not unrelated. So keep that on your radar as well. I'll drop a link to that in the chat. And then lastly, there was an email, San Francisco Transit Writers, they're having an event on the 20th, which is worth checking out, and the link is in the chat. So, and once again, thank you to everyone for putting this together. As both a transit worker and a transit writer, I fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I meant electric shuttle buses owned by the public and with union drivers is what I really meant. Okay, Margaret, did you want to say something? No? Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions, comments, thoughts?
I'm just wanted to express thanks to everyone who took time out of a sunny Sunday to come and join this and take action. So thank you.
Okay. So another Carol.
Hi. I have trouble with people who think that public transit is welfare. That's, been a kind of communication block. That there really are lots of people who think that public transit is welfare, along with food stamps and all the rest of it.
I would say I think you're right, but it's also partly because they don't find it something that they use. And if we could build it into something that all of us use, then people would just see it as an essential public service, like the roads.
Terrific, thank you.
Okay. Adina, no, you just thumbs up. Okay. So I just want to mention that all of the links to the writing your legislator and calling your legislator and all that stuff is going to be in a follow-up email that we send you. I am delighted that the follow-up email will also include a link to a new action hub, which has been created by the Survive and Thrive Coalition. So you can click on that and sign up, and then you can follow what all these wonderful people are doing and add your voices to it on an ongoing basis, which is what we really need. So do the emergency stuff tomorrow, but put the link to the California Transit Advocacy Hub in your make a bookmark and follow it from now on. Get on their mailing list. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Going once, going twice? Okay. Thank you so much. Okay.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Marjorie. Thanks, John.
Bye, and thanks.
Thanks, Reverend Ivory. Jean, I think I need to get you